So we continue to follow the top stories this Monday morning. Jenny Horne, host of Next Gen Investing, is with me, and we briefly mentioned Nvidia this week, but obviously this is huge. This is the week people were waiting for. What are the analysts saying? What are you watching? Good morning, Jenny.
Good morning, Nicole. And I definitely think that we know that two friends of the market lately have been Jensen Huang as well as Jerome Powell, but now there will be a critical test, especially for the overall read on tech when Nvidia does report this Wednesday. So I'm sure we will be covering in depth pretty much every session until then, because there's a reason this has become the most valuable company, and now by a sizable margin. We saw a pullback last week, as right now there just seems to be some degree of hesitation or perhaps just profit taking at around all-time highs because of the sky-high levels that we've seen Nvidia remain at. And I know we've pulled back from those highs and actually pulled back last week when you look at the week-to-date performance, but right now, this is definitely going to be a critical test, especially because we've already heard some different tones coming out of, various software CEOs, as well as like CEO Sam Altman of OpenAI did compare the current market enthusiasm for AI investments to the conditions during the dot-com boom and bust just 2 decades ago. So we also heard from Meta last week freezing its AI hiring. That also put a bit of a dampened tone on the overall market. And there definitely does seem to be a slight shift as far as just the overall enthusiasm right now tied to the rally behind Nvidia. We've now pulled back about 3.5% from those levels. But then you look at the sell side, and I'd say there's no reason for concern. Last week, I covered nothing but price target raises and, really enthusiastic conviction. Wedbush was one that said they still believe in a huge bullish thesis for the mass AI potential. Baird also raising its price target on Nvidia to 225 from 195 with an outperform rating. They're also increasing their revenue and earnings estimates, citing this significant acceleration for GB200 sell-through shipments in July. And they expect ongoing shipment momentum for Nvidia and XAI shipments weighted to fiscal fourth quarter. Also highlighted, GB300 is on track for an initial late September launch, which does represent some significant performance upgrades versus the prior version of the GP200. So Stifel, another one, raising their price target a bit more modestly to 212 from 202 with a buy rating. Also do expect another report of a beat as far as guidance, as well as H20 shipments, which resumed back in July, coupled with this accelerating demand again for that GB300 infrastructure. And their supply chain checks continue to point to expectations for further ramp of those GB300 orders for year end, even as the sustained momentum does continue for the prior iterations. So all in all, you look at the sell side and you think there was no reason to be concerned, but some of these various fund managers I was reading about were saying, hey, we took some of our exposure off the table because this does provide an element of risk when Nvidia has become as top heavy as it frankly has. But I do think that overall, it always seems now in the last couple of reports, one of the biggest risks is that we expect this degree of huge volatility and expect movement in either direction, and then it ends up having a fairly muted session. So I just hope for some movement here, but I guess neutral is also still not a bad place to see things end up, of course, once we get those numbers Wednesday.
Yeah, and look, it's really interesting to see some of these price target raises ahead of the numbers, so they're still believers, even with the what's been going on. I don't even know how to describe it with what has been going on with China, the back and forth. Are they able to send chips, not able to? Do they send certain chips? The 15% of the revenue that needs to be given to the government, the Blackwell chip that is getting prepared for China. There's just been, and also the skepticism over the kinds of chips from China. They're worried that the chips from Nvidia may not be the right ones or the good ones or whatever. So there seems to be obviously the wild card there, but that's not the main thing for Nvidia, obviously.
No, but I do think that will be a critical test, as I think China has never been more of a conversation surrounding Nvidia, and it's like almost the geopolitical blowback we've seen now weigh on, unfortunately, their expected revenue for the coming quarters. They have handled this in the past. It has always been my argument, is they've been able to adjust to various export controls in the past quite well. Better than their competition. And they're able to also churn out new iterations of of each of their various chips faster than they were just 5 years ago. So that's encouraging, but definitely I think that in regards to some of the news we got last week, that they were already yanking some of their to their suppliers, the H20. I mean, like demand was read as a negative, but I think that perhaps that could mean that we're seeing another chip in the workings, and that will be a major question that needs to be answered on this earnings call.
And I wanted to talk about Intel. It's something we heard something about late last week. We've gotten confirmation, the 10% stake, and now Hassett is saying that the government is likely to continue to do this with other companies. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is unusual, the way that we've seen now these various government workings with some of the largest chip manufacturers. And the Trump administration has now followed through with its intent to back Intel, as they confirmed a staggering $11.1 billion investment into the U.S. company. The funding will come from several different avenues, and under the agreement, the U.S. will be purchasing about $8.9 billion worth of shares of Intel's common stock, to be funded by the remaining $5.7 billion in grants that was previously awarded, but not yet paid by the CHIPS Act. Another $3.2 billion will be stemming from the Secure Enclave program through the U.S. Department of Defense, and the final $2.2 billion are grants Intel has already received through the CHIPS Act. So Lip-Bu Tan, the CEO of Intel, of course, did say that this is driving historic investments in a vital industry. And under the deal, we know that they will be buying about 433 million shares at around $20.47 a piece, which equates to about a 10% stake, making then the U.S. government the largest investor of the company. It will be a passive ownership, meaning no board representation or government rights will be granted. But this is huge. It does follow that 2% stake we got from just SoftBank just last year.
Jenny Horne, thank you. Good luck there at both NVIDIA and Intel this morning. Thank you.